Over the years, the stares became more frequent. I'm not surprised, really. It's okay. You can stare. It's hard not to when you're looking at a 3-time world champion.
Hello, I'm Maureen J, the President and CEO of the Paley Center for Media, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to a very special, poignant, and powerful PaleyImpact program, 9/11 and the Healing Power of Sports. This program is made possible by our tremendous partners at the Blanche and Irving Laurie Foundation, and we extend a warm welcome to our dear friends, Jean and Scott Korf, and thank them for their continued and most generous support of the Paley Center. As a lifetime New Yorker and the proud daughter of a New York City firefighter, it is hard to believe that 20 years have passed. Our lives remain forever changed by the tragic events of that Tuesday morning on September 11th, 2001. We will never forget. In the painful aftermath of that day, we grieved and searched for signs of normalcy in a disrupted world. And it was the return of televised sports that was among the most important steps in our healing process. Throughout that emotional and most difficult fall, we turned to familiar athletes, coaches, and broadcasters to be reminded that though we would never be the same, there was hope that we could still experience joy, inspiration, and unity, thanks to our shared love of sports. Today, we are truly honored to bring together some of the most iconic and respected figures in sports and media, all of whom have a deep personal connection to 9/11. They will reflect on their own experiences and how televised sports throughout history has demonstrated the power to unite and heal. Including in this past year, as the nation and the world were in lockdown, it was the return of televised sports that once again became the beacon of light and the symbol that all would ultimately be okay. Never before has Paley's mission been more vital, as media has been the undisputed connector to a nation in these unprecedented times. Paley is uniquely positioned to meet this moment with impactful conversation led by influential leaders such as the esteemed guests that we are truly honored to have with us today. They will share their insights about how sports can bring us together and reestablish a foundation of normalcy following a crisis. We are so proud to welcome to our conversation Joe Buck, Fox Sports lead NFL and MLB play-by-play announcer, Tony Dungy, NBC sports analyst and Super Bowl winning head coach, Boomer Esiason, radio and TV sports analyst and former NFL quarterback, Susie Kolber, Monday Night Countdown host for ESPN, Dhani Jones, former NFL player, entrepreneur, and philanthropist, Joe Torre, former manager of the New York Yankees, member of the Baseball Hall of Fame, manager of 4 World Series champions, and special assistant to the Commissioner of Baseball. And Bobby Valentine, executive director of athletics at Sacred Heart University and former MLB player and manager. Now, before we start the program, there's one brief housekeeping note. If you're tweeting, our hashtag on Twitter is #PaleyImpact. And now I'm so pleased to introduce our moderator, Ernie Johnson, one of television's most respected sportscasters. He is the host of the always entertaining Inside the NBA on TNT, as well as the host of Turner and CBS's NCAA Division I Men's Basketball Championship coverage. Ernie is the lead announcer for Turner's coverage of MLB and has covered the NFL, the Olympics, and Wimbledon. He is also the author of the acclaimed book, Unscripted, The Unpredictable Moments That Make Life Extraordinary. Please join me in welcoming Ernie Johnson. Over to you, Ernie.
Maureen, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and to be part of this PaleyImpact as we talk about 9/11 and the healing power of sports. It's wonderful to see everybody again, even when it's, this kind of way. But that's the way we do things these days, and we adapt. And I think we all, in the next time, we're just going to share what you remember that day 20 years ago, if it's okay, let me tell you, I was in the air that day. I was coming back from Australia and the Goodwill Games. We'd been there a month. And so we're flying from Brisbane back to the West Coast. And then I'm going to fly from LA to Atlanta and see the family. And it wasn't until we landed in LA, and I think we were about the last plane that was allowed to land in the States. And we got out, and all the captain did was come on and say, "You'll notice there's no action going on here at LAX today. That's because there's been a national emergency. That's all I can tell you. Just do what you're told when you get off the plane." And we were met by FBI and ushered out of the airport and to a rental car place. And then we were all just basically hearing what had happened. And we were stunned. It had already happened. We were in the air when it was going down. And so I got a van with two of my coworkers, and we drove cross country for 36 hours straight. I didn't see a frame of what had happened until Thursday morning when I got into my house. And it was all just so surreal. But I just know that my family was like, my dad's in the air and we don't know what's going on. And it was, and we were just oblivious to it. But man, it was just unreal. And I know everybody's got a story. Joe Buck, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about that day?
Well, I mean, it's crazy that it's been 20 years since that day. And I think what stands out to me is how back then vulnerable we all felt for the first time in our own country. And I remember after the layoff, baseball started back up again. And I was driving down to Busch Stadium. My dad was in his own car driving down to Busch Stadium. And I remember feeling scared to be in a stadium again and to be amongst 40,000 fans. Oddly enough, it's hard to believe now, felt vulnerable. And that led to a poem my dad had written and then read. And it felt like, should we be here? Should we be in the stadium right now with what's happened and the death and destruction and what this means for our country? And the answer was a resounding yes. And life returned back somewhat to normal, albeit with heavy hearts. So I don't think anybody's story is any different, except for those who lost somebody on that tragic day. You remember where you were. You remember how you felt. You remember what it was like being home, being glued to the TV and seeing every turn of events was happening. So, it definitely does highlight the power that sports have to heal. And I was a proud, small part of it. And, a lot of people can dismiss sports, but man, it is a great unifier. And maybe now more than ever, considering it's been 20 years and where we sit in this country with as many divisions as have been put up between all of us.
Yeah. Hey, Boomer, kind of following up on something that Joe points out there too, when he say that you lost someone on that horrible day. And I don't know of anybody who lost more friends than you did.
Yeah, thanks, Ernie. It was a tough day for me. I was actually stuck in Denver. I was doing the Monday night game in Vesco Field the night before on September 10th between the Broncos and the Giants. That was the game that Ed McCaffrey had broken his leg. And I was coming back home that morning on September 11th. I was actually sitting on the plane. We hadn't pulled away from the tarmac just yet. And then the pilot came on and said exactly what your pilot said to you, basically almost verbatim. As we got off the plane, we didn't know what had happened. We looked up. I saw the first tower had just been hit by, American Airlines number 11. That tower was where my offices for my foundation were. We were on the 101st floor. We were within the Cantor Fitzgerald company that lost 658 employees that day. Luckily enough for me, my employees were not in the office when the plane struck, and the plane struck right around floor number 99. So everybody above that basically had no chance of getting out of the building, and that's where all my friends were working. So you can imagine what it was like getting off of that plane, sitting in Denver airport, trying to figure out what my next move was. And I was trying to get a hold of my wife. And finally, after about 10 phone calls, she picked it up. I said, you have to go get our kids out of school and get them home. I was stuck in Denver for 3 days, trying feverishly to find people, find out what was going on, get as much information as I possibly could. And one of the guys that I finally got a hold of was Howard Lutnick. He was the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald and still is to this day. And I caught him down in Lower Manhattan. He was at one of his coworkers' apartments because he was late to work that day because he was taking his child to his first day of kindergarten. And then when he heard about the attack on the tower, he immediately ran to the tower because he had all of his employees in there, family members in there. And I got a hold of him, and I had a conversation with him. Probably it was around 11:30 or 12, I'm thinking. And he had just gotten to that apartment after the collapse of the towers, and he had gotten caught in all of that. And luckily enough, he survived. But I didn't get back until that Friday. And I remember immediately going down to seeing the destruction and the mayhem and all the tears and just the heartache and the wailing that was going on. And for 10 days, I stayed down there. The thing that I remember most about all of that is how nobody in my sport, in the sport of football, especially if you were a Jet or a Giant, wanted to play that next weekend. The players couldn't play. And I remember working for Fox at that time. And my boss is saying to me, if there was going to be football the next weekend, Boomer, you don't have to come. You don't have to show up. Don't think that you have to be here. They were very kind to me at that time, knowing the impact that it had on me. So I was very thankful that the NFL and almost all sports canceled their next big events, and the NFL didn't resume until the next 2 weeks. So, every year I'm reminded of it. I work down in Lower Manhattan now, and every time I come out of my office building, I look to my right, and there is One World Trade Center. It's nicknamed the Freedom Tower. It stands tall by the waiting pools, and the pools are something that are the reflecting pools. Excuse me, are something to behold. They did a great job down there. So I'm reminded every 20 years, but it's never far from me. As you can see over my shoulder, as I have the pictures of the World Trade Centers right under the American flag behind me.
Boomer, so you were in Denver doing Monday Night Football. Somebody on this panel was playing that night, Dhani Jones, who after Dhani, it's strange because your rookie year of 2000, you have an injury in the preseason and you're unable to play any games. So really, that was your first NFL game, was that Monday night, September 10th. And then comes September 11th. Just go back and piece together for me the excitement, the adrenaline of playing in your first NFL game, and then the stark reality of Tuesday.
Yeah, it was kind of one of those life-changing moments in your career when you first got to step on an NFL football field and play. As my first year in the league, I tore my ACL, so I was on injured reserve, and now I got to travel out to Denver, Colorado in the game that Boomer happened to be calling. And, it's kind of like my heart is right now, and my breath, I was a little bit out of it, right? Because you're at altitude and you realize what's really at stake. The game was sort of a blur because it was Monday Night Football. But I do remember when we leave the game, we're not staying overnight. We're just jumping on an airplane and we're taking a red eye to go home. And mind you, my parents had came out to watch the game as well. But I just remember landing in New Jersey, going to my house. I went to bed, as most people do after a red eye. And I woke up and I felt this eerie silence. It seemed like nothing was happening in the world. It seemed like there was this pause. Something was stagnant in the air. And I cut on the TV, and all I saw was the tower with smoke coming out of it. And I thought it was the most surreal moment because I thought it might have been a movie or it might have been another place. And I kept changing the channel, and it was the same picture over and over and over on every single channel. And I tried to make a phone call phone wouldn't work. There was sort of this weird moment when you're kind of going through recognizing what's happening. And then I don't remember exactly who came on the air and talked about the towers being hit, but then I visually watched the next tower be hit. And I just sank into my chair, and I didn't really know what to do, because I knew that my parents, they were still in Colorado. I was sitting in Jersey, sort of helpless. And I suppose when all things came through and I was able to get through to my parents, they drove all the way from Denver, Colorado, back to Maryland. You know, I remember going down to the stadium and having that same conversation that Boomer just spoke about. We don't want to play. I don't even think we even talked about playing. I don't even think we talked about the game of football. I think the greatest thing I felt was this sense of family and community that started to percolate from the locker room. And there was momentum to try to find a way to help, because we knew as athletes, as those that played the last game, we had a responsibility to help. And we had a close affiliation and connectivity to the city that loved and will love and support us. And all we wanted to do was, much like Boomer said of the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, is rush down to the towers and find a way to get across the river and go to every single firehouse and fire station and talk to every single paramedic. I still have a fireman's hat from the day of September 11th in my house. Every day I wake up, I go downstairs and I see that fire hat. And so it's a day that I'll never forget, as we never will as a panel and as a country and as Americans. But it was just one of those moments where you felt the world skip a heartbeat.
Susie, were you supposed to fly that day?
I was. Just a tiny bit of background on what my schedule was like at that time. I was taking 5 flights every week and working 6 days. I was hosting the Edge NFL matchup show in New Jersey, and then flying from there to our ESPN at the time was Sunday Night Football, our ESPN Sunday Night site. And then I was doing a feature that aired in the pregame before ABC's Monday Night Football. So every Tuesday, I took a flight to the site of a player who was going to be in that game that following Monday. And I spent the whole day with that player. And the feature was called Backstage. So it was sort of a slice of their life off the field. And I was scheduled to spend the day with Darryl Green in Washington. So I was on my way to the airport that morning, stopped off at ESPN just to grab some paperwork that I needed. And I watched everything unfold on a little TV at my desk. Like Dahani said, I mean, watching stuff was paralyzing to watch it. And I did watch everything unfold. My mother called me fairly hysterical, "Please don't fly today." And practically at that point, yes, everything at that point had been canceled, had been grounded. Exactly 1 week from that day, I did take a flight to Washington. And as we know how different everything was, my producer refused to get on the plane. There were at least 2 air marshals in the cabin, and that was consistent going forward. And as we know too, of anybody who flew that season, and I continued my 5 flights a week, but every airport was at least a 3-hour wait in the security line to get through. Because none of those things we experience today, none of those things were said. Everybody was just trying to figure it out. And I do want to recognize too that, you know, waiting in lines all pretty much means nothing because, like most of us, we lost somebody that day. And my good friend Tommy Piccarelli was a fabulous studio cameraman at Fox, and I had previously worked at Fox. And he and his wife Kia had found out that summer that they were pregnant. So Kia didn't go to a wedding back in their hometown, back in the Boston area. And he boarded American Airlines Flight 11 that morning. Fairly empty flights, we know, on Tuesday, full tank of gas to get back to the West Coast. And he was on that first plane. And it just, like we talked about, how can that many years have passed to think that Tommy's middle name was Nicholas and their son never met his dad is just so beyond heartbreaking. So we all have, I believe, that it touches us in so many personal ways. And I just remember sitting home the next weekend when we found out we wouldn't, there was this horrible void because you want to be with the people you love and your football family that you're with. But it was obviously the so right thing to do. Who wanted to think football? But then getting back there that next week, that experience of sharing as all the people in the stadium and as a country and being part of something when you're all feeling the same thing, the same pain, the same wanting to do something to sort of help experience some normalcy, or just, unfurl that flag that was the whole length of the field that night for Sunday Night Football, just to feel proud as an American and also to share in something together.
Well, that's powerful. The Tony Dungy, so you're down in Florida at this time. You're down in Tampa Bay as the NFL season has just started, and you've already heard from like Dhani and Boomer talking about guys just don't want to play. So how do you approach your team, and what are you there to do with your team at that time?
Yeah, we had that same talk. We didn't want to play, but we regrouped and said, you know what? We don't know if we're going to play or not, but if we do play, we are going to give the country a show because that's what we need. And that was our mindset. And I can tell you, Ernie, I was in the mode of a football coach on that Tuesday. Our daughter was born on Friday before that. So we got a 4-day-old daughter. We played our first game, and I'm just in my cubicle with the other assistant coaches. We got no lights, no windows, no outside contact at all. We're dialed in on getting ready for the Philadelphia Eagles. And someone comes in and bursts in and says, the World Trade Center got hit by a plane. So our first thought is, gosh, it had to be foggy, something happened, somebody ran into it, or a pilot just made an error. That's terrible. Isn't that awful? And we go back to our preparation. Well, then about 45 minutes later, they come back in, tower got hit again. Now we know this isn't an accident. This something is going on. Is there a war out there? We all come out. Now we turn the TVs on. And now it's like Joe said, you're helpless. You feel vulnerable. I'm thinking I've got a 4-day-old daughter there and I can't protect her. What if this is a war? What if we're at war? We're 2 miles from Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base. Maybe we're going to get hit. And all these things start going through your mind. But as we saw the terrible aftermath, then our thought was, well, what are we going to do? And the NFL thankfully said, we're not going to play. That gave us a week to mourn and grieve, get over it. But the next week, I can tell you, I'd always been one, when we set our schedule as a home team, I never wanted our players out there for the national anthem because guys don't want to stand. It's tight. They're nervous. They're fidgety. I was like Bud Grant. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. So rather than, do that, I said, we'll be in the locker room. We'll play the national anthem. We'll come out and kick off. That next game, I said, hey, we are going to be out there for the national anthem. And we did. And it was just the most spectacular feeling to say, you know what? we're part of this great country and you can't stop us. I don't even know who you are out there, but you are not going to stop us.
Thank you, Tony. Let's get to, and I appreciate the patience of Joe Torre and Bobby Valentine, who were the managers of the Yankees and the Mets, respectively, in that season of 2001 when this happened. Thanks for your patience, but I think it's so valuable to get everybody weighing in about where they were and how, and that's the amazing thing about something that happened 20 years ago is still so amazingly fresh. So Joe Torre, take me back.
Well, for sure, it's like everybody's alluded to. It doesn't leave you. I mean, you're so vivid in your memory. And I was up in my bedroom. Well, we had just played a series against the Red Sox. In fact, Monday we had one of those wraparound series where we had a 4-game series ending on Monday, and Roger Clemens was going for his 20th win, and we were rained out Monday night. So Tuesday, I had a commitment to go to a charity luncheon. So I was sort of getting myself organized, and my phone rang, and the car service said, well, I guess it's called off. I said, what are you talking about? And I turned on the TV and I saw what everybody's been talking about. First thought I had, my daughter was 5. And, what is she watching right now? So I went downstairs, and my wife obviously was glued to the TV and trying to protect my daughter from seeing too much of it. It was her first day of kindergarten. It was just a numb feeling. Dahani talked about it. It's, baseball has pretty much been my life, and that was so unimportant at that point in time. I have a son who at the time was working in the Wall Street area, and where was he? It was tough getting through to anybody. I have a sister-in-law, Katie, who was flying for American Airlines, and she was on reserve, so we had no clue where she was. And it was a frantic time trying to, reach loved ones. And baseball, was just so unimportant. I was concerned about my players, finding out a short time later that, guys just jumped in the car and were heading out, going to their homes, because the beginning of September, school is starting all over the country. The players that weren't living in the New York area were obviously, searching for somebody to hug. And that certainly, needed to be a family member. It was frightening. As a kid, you're watching movies on TV, and if there's any kind of war going on, it's always on somebody else's land, never on ours. And this just sort of disarmed the heck out of you, and you didn't know, you didn't know if you could open a door or walk down the street. It was a frightening experience.
Yeah, Bobby Valentine, you guys were on the road, correct? You were going to be playing that Tuesday night. Was it Pittsburgh?
Yeah, you got it, Ernie. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me how that morning unfolded for you.
Yeah, well, we were in Pittsburgh, and like everyone said, just going about our business. I got back to my hotel room after working out in the morning, saw what happened on TV, saw the second plane hit the second tower, looked out the hotel window, saw that there were these black SUVs that were blocking off the entrances and the exits to the building across the street. I ran downstairs, asked what the building was. I was told it was the FBI headquarters. And immediately I got our traveling secretary on the phone, and we got our bus to the hotel. Everyone packed up, and we were just getting out of Dodge. We were going to get as far away as we could into safety. We found a hotel out by Robert Morris University, 45 minutes or so, checked into the hotel. Everyone's calling to figure out the safety of their loved ones. Of course, we all experienced that same hour, 2 hours, 3 hours after the planes hit. And I found out my father-in-law was down at the Gracie Mansion. He was supposed to dedicate a statue with the mayor of Jackie Robinson. And he was there at 7:30 in the morning or whatever time, and wound up walking out of Manhattan. And I had to wait those hours on end before we got a cell phone connect. And, we called everybody that we knew worked there, and everyone experienced the same situation. Well, the team wanted to get back, so by about 1 a.m, we reloaded the buses and we drove back to New York City. And I'll tell you that it was an eerie feeling. Everyone knows that feeling of uncertainty and fear. And we were looking for safety somewhere, somehow. And as we approached the George Washington Bridge over on the Jersey side of the Hudson, it was early morning and we thought we'd get a glimpse of Manhattan. And we looked out of the right side of the bus. And everyone who was on the left side of the bus kind of got up and looked over, got their faces over near the windows of the bus. And as we made the turn prior to the Meadowlands, we saw not Manhattan, but the island covered with a black sun. The smoke had encompassed the entire island of Manhattan. And from that minute, for about 45 minutes, we rode in utter silence to Shea Stadium, where we finally got into our cars and drove as quickly as we could home to safety.
Joe and Bobby, you're producing this doc, this extra innings from 9/11, 20 years later. Where did the idea come from, and what do you want to tell people 20 years later?
It's about those who were affected positively because of the sport, because of baseball coming back and football coming back, and how these lives that were destroyed, and how the wounds were so deep, and how people tell their story of how sports in USA and baseball in particular with Joe and I helped heal those wounds.
It was interesting, Ernie. We didn't know when baseball was going to restart, if it was. And when it was determined that Bud Selig said, we're going to play, I think it was on the Monday following the Tuesday. And what we did on Saturday, we had a workout at Yankee Stadium for whoever was still in the area. And there were a number of players and coaches, and Randy Levine, the president of the Yankees, had several bands. And what we were going to do, we were going into the city and stop at the Jacobs Center, which was the staging area. We did that, and obviously there were sleeping bags on the floor, and we got to see all the people that came from all over the country to try to help in what was hoped to be a recovery, but it didn't turn out that way. And then from the Javits Center, we went to St. Vincent's Hospital, and unfortunately, aside from a few firefighters who had issues with smoke inhalation, there was nobody from the building there. And finally, we went over to the Armory. Now, this was a sensitive area in my mind, because this is where family members were waiting for confirmation about their loved ones, waiting for DNA results. And I was a little hesitant about our going in there, because I felt it was such a personal time for the families. And I remember Randy Levine went in ahead of us, and he was in there a few minutes and then waved us on in. And we went into the Armory, and, there were families and groups of people separated by these like low partitions. And, there were clergy and counselors, and we walked around the perimeter of that area in the Armory. And I remember one woman sort of, signaled to us to come on over. And we walked over there, and Bernie Williams, one of our players, was with us. And he goes up to the woman and he said to her, I don't know what to say. He said, but you look like you need a hug. And with that, Bernie, grabbed her and hugged her. And that sort of loosened other people up to come toward us. And it was surreal because they'd show us pictures of their family members who were lost with Yankee paraphernalia on and Met paraphernalia and baseball people. And we spent, I don't know how long there, but it was such an emotional, place to be at that time. And I think I realized at that time that, we in baseball really had a job to do because people were, looking for some sort of distraction from the horrifying days that had just passed.
Yes, Susie and Joe Buck. So Joe, you get to call this. The World Series, the playoffs that year were just amazing. It was just one incredible story after another. Susie, you're covering the world of sports at a time when suddenly you're never hit more acutely than that these are games that you're covering and this is real life. How did you guys walk that line?
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I think you have to find the right tone. But like Joe just said, I think after you set the table and you show the proper reverence for what had transpired, especially being in New York, doing a World Series in the Bronx and watching this incredible World Series that went down to the final pitch. The baseball was great, but as Joe said, people were looking for a distraction. So I don't want to minimize it by saying distraction because it was more than just a distraction. But after you pay the proper respects, I think you just do the game. And I don't know that you have to continually go back over everything that's happened every couple of innings because people just want to get a break from it as best they can. But somebody said to me the other day, and I thought this really rang true, 9/11 means a lot to every citizen of this country, but it's different for people in New York. It's different for people in DC. So I say that knowing that we're headed back to New York. Major League Baseball recognized that this anniversary was coming up, and we're going to be there for the Yankees and the Mets in a weekend series, and on September 11th on a Saturday night. And I imagine that will be a very emotional night. And then there we are doing a game again. So you have all the emotion, you pay the proper respects, but then you do a baseball game. And, there is a line to find there, Ernie. I think the line can be set early and you don't keep crossing back over it. You at some point, you just do a baseball game. And that's kind of how we approached it.
Yeah, I would echo what Joe says. And I would say even maybe more than a distraction, I think sometimes if you feel like, well, this is just television, this is just sports, what does this mean? But it does give people an escape. And we're responsible for allowing people to escape for a few hours to enjoy a game. So yes, there's always that proper reverence. And I can relate it to, I was in the Superdome for the first game after Katrina. And it was this celebration while still obviously also understanding the impact and the devastation and what had happened to people and being able to show those kind of things, but yet talk about the future. And I said to all the guys that I worked with this year going into the season, people have been through so much over the last 18 months. And while we obviously acknowledge all of that, I feel like we almost have to be, even on TV and in our pregame show, like even a little more joyful. Let's have a little fun because people are so tired of talking about COVID and vaccinations and testing and even the worst parts of that, all the people they lost, that when they tune in, they want to smile and laugh and escape and root for their team. And we're charged with providing that.
You know, Boomer and Dhani. Dhani, you play with the Giants. Boomer, you play with the Jets. Boomer, you're a New York guy, Long Island guy. Joe Buck said, everyone has memories of that day, but when you are a New York guy, it's different. How's it different? How deeply does that run differently for you?
You know, I was listening to everybody talk here, and I think everybody hit the right notes. For Tony and for Dhani, playing our sport and standing on the sideline, the next time they got out on the field for the national anthem, it must have been incredible for them to be a part of that. I wish I could have been a part of that as a player. Unfortunately, I was retired at that point. You know, the interesting thing, as Joe and Bobby alluded to, I flew over Lower Manhattan. I think it was that Wednesday. And the only way I could get back is if I could find somebody who had a classification of a plane who owned it and was the pilot of that plane. And we flew over Manhattan. It was not another plane in the sky. It was just us. There's about 6 guys on this plane. And we landed at Farmingdale out here on Long Island. And the thing that struck me is when I went past the train station in my home where I live now, it's a commuter area. So there's 2 train stations, and it's a Thursday night. And usually the train stations are empty, but all the cars remained in the train stations because all the guys never came home to take the cars home after work. That was a sobering reminder when I first got home. You know, football started 2 weeks later, and it was Sunday, September 23rd, and Fox said, "We want you to cover what's going on in New York. Do you have a problem with that?" I said, "No, I'll stay in New York." I, like Susie, was flying all over the place, and she was right. The airports were just complete madness for the next year and a half or so. But I broadcast from the USNS Comfort. So the Mercy class hospital ship was brought to New York for all the things that Joe Torre was talking about. They thought that there were going to be more injuries, more people. They were going to need extra hospital space. So they brought the ship up here, and I was on the deck of the ship doing my show on Fox that Sunday before I flew to Green Bay to go do the Monday night game. And it was just such a surreal feeling. And if you were here and you were around the actual event and near those 16 acres, you could just feel the sadness, and then sadness turning to anger. And then, you know, the anger was on the back pages of all the, you know, the tabloids here in the newspapers. So you lived it in a different type of way because it was always right there for you. But, you know, for me, and then to go to Green Bay on that Monday night, I mean, you know, the national anthem was just amazing. And it's how our country galvanized around that and how sports brought us together. And here it was not only just the Jets and the Giants, the Mets and the Yankees. They had some memorable moments in and around that. The fact that the Yankees went to the World Series that year against the Arizona Diamondbacks was even more amazing. And I was actually at game 1 and 2 in Arizona and game 7 in Arizona. And being around the Yankees, and even not being a Yankee fan, but being a New Yorker, left an indelible mark on me and the memories that came out of all of that. But yeah, it was it's passionate for sure. And it still is for anybody that's down this part of the city and anybody who has lost somebody that was a part of that tragic day.
Go ahead, Dhani. How about being a New York Giant at that time?
So, you know, I just remember, as I was mentioning before, going to every single firehouse. And in the same way that, you know, Joe talked about giving out hugs, that's what we did. There wasn't a lot to speak on, but there was something to feel. And I think that we were the first sports team down at the site once people were allowed through. And I don't exactly recall if it was Jim Fossil, who's many of you know was my coach, who's recently passed, or was Wellington Mara, who gave a talk to us. But I remember them saying, just never forget. And that was what we always carried with us to every single hug and every single handshake and every single family that we were able to embrace. And I remember when we stepped back onto the field, for me, the song that always got me into my frame of mind was "Eye of the Tiger." It was always that song. For some reason, just did something to me. But after September 11th, the national anthem, when I saw the flag come out and every single service member hold the flag tight and everybody stand and everybody
sing,
it sent the chills through my entire body, and nothing greater than that moment and those moments to come could energize me to play the game for those that love to watch and for those that love to play and those that have been there before. And that's the responsibility of players, to play the game that you love so that those that may not or may have can live vicariously through you. And that ultimately was the moment where I never forgot that. And I never forgot the moment when we stepped foot at the site. But most importantly, never forget the hugs and the embrace of those that had finally started to come together.
Tony Dungy, so how did you take the next step from now what?
Ernie, I took a great lesson from my dad. My dad fought in World War II with the Tuskegee Airmen. And anytime I'd go to him with a problem or an issue, he'd always say to me, "What are you going to do to make things better?" And that's what I hit my team with. Hey, we can't fix what happened, but what are we going to do to make things better? And that's what we wanted to do. That was, I think, all of our players' motivation, our whole organization. Let's play for our country.
And I so appreciate everybody being on here today. Unfortunately, we've got about 5 minutes left. And it's never easy when you have this many voices with such good stuff to say. So I try not to cut anybody off, but let's bring it on home and just go around the table when we talk about the second part really of the title of this Paley Impact was, and the healing power of sports. And just give me your best reason for why that is. Why does sports have that ability to help us through? And we'll start, we're going to go around the horn. Whenever you look, you can just follow whoever you'd like, but we'll start with Bobby Valentine.
Well, sport is that team effort that shows people what a great team effort can do to entertain, but also to get the results that people are looking for. And we just look and lean on sports to be that piece of our life that can change things when they're not going well and even make things better when they are.
Well, I said to my players, I said that NY on your cap represents more than Yankee. You had a responsibility to the people of New York. But I know we were all talking about the national anthem and how proud we all were. Game 2 of the World Series, at home plate, Ray Charles singing "America the Beautiful" is a lasting memory that I will have. And my goosebumps couldn't have been higher. I can tell you that right now.
Susie?
Looking at it from the fan standpoint and being able to be in a stadium with 60, 65,000 people, anytime you have a large group with a shared experience and all pulling in the same direction for something, which is often so rare, there's nothing more powerful than that. And to experience the electricity, energy of something like that is what truly makes the sports experience so memorable.
Dhani Jones.
One thing that I've been thinking about a lot is how do we as community ultimately come together? And we come together because we aligned on principles. And I'd say one of the greatest principles that we all stand for in America is this principle of freedom. Sports represents freedom. Sports represents an opportunity to forget everything else and to live as free as you possibly can. That's what the world of sports is about. It's when you start as a young child and you can play until as old as you'd like. You know, I think about my son when he's out playing sports. I've never seen a bigger smile on his face because he knows he's free. And when we all step foot on whatever field, pitch, diamond, we all feel free. And that's the power. That's the true power of sports, that freedom.
Hey, Joe Buck, I mean, you have the best seat in the house for these things, for these sporting events. And you've seen them now, not just post 9/11, but post pandemic, and you've called games in every conceivable scenario, whether that's remotely or in a stadium with nobody there. Just having that fan influence and that desire for sport, explain it to me.
Well, I think now more than ever, the word "we" has been kind of taken out of our everyday language, unfortunately. And when fans pile into a stadium or they're in somebody's basement watching a game and they can say "we," that means the guys on the field, that means the people watching. That the one sport I can root for and team I can root for is the St. Louis Blues in hockey. And when they get a big goal, you're giving high fives and hugs to people you have no idea who they are. I don't know. And it brings people across every possible line, ethnic line, political persuasion, religious beliefs, whatever. Nobody cares. It's the one thing where everybody goes, "Oh my God, we just scored a goal." And to be able to use that word, which is it's rarely said anymore because now it's "we," but then it becomes "yeah, but we want to do this as a country." Yeah, but in sports, when you have a team and a fan base, it becomes "we," and it connects everybody in that fan base. So it is nothing to be dismissed. Talking about the power of sports to heal and the power of sports to bring people together. And I think it's needed now, unfortunately, even more in some respects than it was needed 20 years ago.
No, it's just like Joe said. I think of stadiums, you come in to a home game, there's 70,000 people there. You might not know the person 3 seats from you, but we're all in this together because we are rooting for our home team. And we want our guys to win, and we're in it together, and we're going to celebrate together when they win. We're going to cry if they lose, and we might not even know each other. But that's what sports does, and to me, that's the beauty of it.
Boomer, I'll give you a gold star for patience, and I'll give you the last word on how we heal through the games we play.
You know, my experiences came directly from my dad, like Tony's, and I'm sure everybody else's parents on here had some influence in their life somewhere along the line. We would share Saturdays and Sundays watching the Mets, the Knicks, the Rangers, and of course the Giants. My dad loved the Giants. He taught me to hate the Yankees. All Met fans tend to hate the Yankees. Sorry about that, Joe Torre, but it's a learned behavior, and you're sharing this within your family. And then as Tony and Joe has both said, when you go to the stadium, you're there pulling for your team. And when your hockey team scores a goal, there's, 18,000 people standing and screaming at the tops of their lungs just for a goal. And you look around and we're all wearing red, white, and blue here in New York, and it's great for us. So I just think that we all look at sports as something that's extension of our family, where we came from, our memories, our history. And that's why, when Joe Torre says it's the NY for New York, not just for the New York Yankees, he's spot on, because he's touched, and they have touched, teams have touched all of us somewhere along our lives. And it's the one common thread that we all have together in this great world of athletics that we all are lucky enough to be a part of.
Thank you so much. This was sensational. We could go on for hours talking about this and the impact it's had on us and continues to. And I was struck today by, as we sat to do this, many of us were glued to the set again today to see what's going on in Afghanistan, and it's 20 years later, and we're worried, and so thank you, and let's hope that 9/11 never fades from anybody's memory, that's always the event that you think about. I would hate to have anything ever supersede that, so that you'd say 9/11, what's that? No, let's always remember. And let's always remember the impact you all had. Bobby, Valentine, Joe, Torre, in the immediate aftermath, thank you. And for all of you, thanks for your insights. Thank you so much for joining us for this important and timely Paley Impact. Be sure to support the Paley Center and consider becoming a Paley member by visiting PaleyCenter.org.